Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Hayes, North American Leadership Manager at Students for Liberty. Welcome back to this continuation of Students for Liberty's interview with David Kelly. In the previous session, we talked about an introduction to Objectivism. This is part 2 of the Truth and Toleration webinar series, Objectivism and Current Affairs. David, in our last discussion last week, you mentioned tolerance as a positive thing. As you said, it's a buzzword on campuses now. What are your views on there?
Yeah, it is a buzzword on campus. But in my view, when people talk about toleration on campus, it means something quite different and a little wild compared to what I consider a valid concept. I mean, when you hear people talking about toleration, it usually consists of demands like trigger warnings.
Yeah.
You tolerate people by not offending them with anything that might upset them. Or microaggressions, same thing. If I say something that has, that you take as a slight against your ethnicity or sex or whatever. And then the cultural appropriation is another form of this buzzword where, there was an incident we were talking about before at Yale a couple years ago on Halloween, where students were warned, don't wear costumes from other ethnicities.
Right.
So I don't know what you can go as, a ghost or maybe a pirate. There are not too many pirates around to offend. But anyway, if you use symbols, even cuisine, dress from a culture that's not your own, you're appropriating that.
Right.
So all of these are it might be crazy forms of toleration. And they're crazy because they're all based on identity politics. That's the real driver of all this stuff.
Yeah, I want to loop back to microaggressions really quick because, I mean, that's something that we see very frequently on college campuses these days, and it's really come about in full force. And to me, I find these microaggressions to be particularly ridiculous. And I'm sure you have heard of them before as well, but what I see as them being is, like you said, any slight in any regard to somebody, they're going to be triggered, which is what you mentioned before too, the trigger warnings.
Yeah.
So have you heard of any interesting microaggressions?
Yeah, actually, I have a whole list here. It's a widely available list on the internet, examples of racial microaggressions. But for example, I mean, to give you an idea of the extent of it, one microaggression is everyone can succeed in this society if they work hard enough.
How is that a microaggression?
Well, here's the explanation. People of color are given extra unfair benefits because of their race. That's what's heard or alleged to be heard.
I see.
And so it's in a way, if I say something like that, I'm challenging affirmative action, or I'm challenging the idea that blacks have been oppressed. And so to a black person, that's offensive. That's a microaggression, even if I don't intend any harm.
Right.
There are a whole list of these that are used now in schools.
Yeah, you brought up identity politics as well. We hear this term a lot, but what does identity politics mean exactly?
Well, that's a philosophical question, so you came to the right place.
Good.
I think the concept of identity politics really has 3 components. First of all, the idea that our identities are defined and set by our group membership, and the groups, and specifically not the groups we chose, our ethnicity, our sex, our sexual preferences. And so we're not fully individuals. We are defined, our very identity is created not by ourselves as individuals and our choices and actions and accomplishments, but by the groups we were born into. So, for example, a woman who's of Mexican heritage and is gay, let's say, would that set of groups would be her tribe, and she would be expected to identify with other people who are other Mexican gay women, and to view everyone else as kind of an outsider or a potential threat.
Sure.
And if she fraternized too much with other people, she would be, considered a traitor or whatever. I mean, you hear this stuff. So that's the first point. The identity comes from groups. The second one is that words hurt. That words are coercive. There's an old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but
right.
words, well, that's being denied. Libertarians and objectivists for sure, and I think essentially all libertarians would say, no, coercion means force.
Right.
If I slug you or assault you or lock you up or something. But the concept of coercion has been extended to mean any kind of influence that you don't like. So I'm coercing you if I say something, if I tell for example, one form of so-called sexual harassment is telling a joke.
Right.
About a woman, about women. And so, okay, that because your identity is, that's an attack on your identity. Mm-hmm. So, and thirdly, I think this is the really essential element, is that among these group identities, there are oppressed groups and oppressor groups, dominant and victim. So that there's an asymmetry on things like trigger warnings and microaggressions. For example, if I wear a sombrero to a Cinco de Mayo party, right? I would be accused of cultural appropriation because I'm not Mexican. But if a Mexican person, say, went to a St. Patrick's Day party wearing green, a leprechaun's hat, ate corned beef and cabbage, is that, I don't think anyone would even think to call that cultural appropriation. Why? Because Irish or Europeans are the dominant.
Right. That's so interesting that too, because in the U.S. we, on St. Patrick's Day, if you're not wearing green, you get pinched. So essentially, if you're not, appropriating the culture, the Irish culture, you're going to get hurt. So that's a little backwards.
Oh, it just shows you how corrupt our society is.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm speaking ironically. But so that is, that I would say is the essence of identity politics. And identity is defined by groups, words are coercive, and there are asymmetries between groups. There's victims and oppressors. And that last one, as I said, is really essential. It's essentially it comes out of Marx, but it's been broadened from Marx's analysis of class conflict to all kinds of things: sex, sexual preference, ethnicity, etc.
Right. Well, thank you for that, David. I hope student listeners will put your analysis to use. As you said, let's move to campus for a more rational context. So what does toleration mean on campus these days?
Well, a rational approach to it, I think, is that toleration is a way of interacting with people you disagree with.
Right.
The first point we have to establish about the concept of toleration is that what you tolerate is not difference per se. To tolerate something means it has to be something negative that you view as negative. So just a simple example, non-ethical. We can tolerate a certain amount of pain at the doctor's office. Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's part of getting better. But there has to be some negative aspect to it for the issue of toleration even to arise. So apply this to people with, for example, different skin color. We should, as a white person, I should tolerate blacks. Well, wait a minute. What's to tolerate? Think about hair color, which doesn't tend to be, a freighted issue. You have brown hair. I used to. But some people are blonde. Do we have to tolerate them because their hair color is different? That's ridiculous. Well, I say the same thing about skin color. There's the whole invoking the concept of tolerance or toleration means it implies the expectation that I have a negative attitude, and that's simply not true. Now, I don't want to trivialize the issue. There has been a whole history of bias against black people. also against Jews, at different times against Irish. So, I mean, there is bigotry, and that's a problem. But my point is, the answer to it is not for one group to reach past its innate bigotry and tolerate another group, but rather to act as individuals and judge people and react to people on the basis of their individual characters and what they've done. I mean, Martin Luther King said it, the content of our character, that's the ground for judgment. And in this respect, I should say, in issues about moral judgment or intellectual toleration, it doesn't even arise if you're a relativist. If you're not prepared to judge anything as good or bad, then you're not in a position to say, I will tolerate this, because you've forsworn a judgment about it. So that's one of the ironies here, that so many people who are preaching toleration are also preaching, anything goes or relativity.
Right. It seems like those advocating for tolerance are not necessarily opposed to judgment per se, but judgmentalism. So whether they're, judging something's wrong with somebody with their point of view, whether it's religion or just the ways that they want to live their life. I'm wondering what your thoughts are there.
Well, as an objectivist, certainly, I think values are objective. And so I judge people. I think we all do, implicitly, even if we say we're relativists, because we look down on certain things. When I was teaching philosophy, I would do this exercise I knew all the freshmen in my class were just, one step away from, kind of moral relativism. So I'd say, just make a list of all think of somebody and make a list of the traits that come to mind. And about half of them were either virtues or vices. And I said, now, when you say someone is dishonest, does that have no significance to you? Well, it was a quick way of getting to the fact that we all do make judgments all the time, and we have to. I mean, so I think there are things that go beyond respecting rights. There are values like, being productive, being creative. There are principles like treating people fairly, being honest, and so forth. And it's not just objectivist. I mean, most moral codes agree on at least some of these things.
Oh, absolutely.
So, the issue about intellectual tolerance, and this is especially important on campus, which is a learning environment, is that we have this tendency to be judgmental and to say, if you disagree with me, there must be something wrong with you if you don't get it. And I have to say, objectivists have been guilty of this themselves, and libertarians as well. And it's pretty natural when you have a really deeply rooted view and you're sure of it to say, why don't you get it?
Right.
But what we forget is that these ideologies, philosophies, values are complicated, and so the virtue of toleration is, first of all, it's a matter of justice. You don't prejudge someone just on the basis of what they say until you know that they've been irrational in some way in arriving at it. So, I mean, if someone thinks that the Earth is flat and the moon landings were a giant hoax and everything like that, I don't need to talk with them anymore. I know this person is not operating in connection with reality.
Right.
But if someone, for example, is a liberal in political philosophy, I don't automatically assume that they're a vicious, power-hungry, anti-human beast. They're, I want to know why. And that's the negative side of toleration. But the positive side is I might actually learn something. And this is the most important point about toleration on campus, in a university setting, because you go there to be exposed to ideas that will enrich your own views.
Right.
And that's one of the things that is just so infuriating to me as a former academic, former teacher, that people are being shielded and sheltered so often
Right.
from hearing challenging ideas. And they're insisting, I don't want to hear anything I disagree with.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, in the United States, we are blessed with the First Amendment, which is fantastic. We're very lucky to have that. And that, that makes a lot of public universities, makes all public universities, they have to uphold the First Amendment for their students. But yet we see time and time again that they are egregiously violating these policies. And it's interesting, like you said, these universities are really doing these students a disservice when they're going there to intellectually explore these ideas, and yet it's more of an indoctrination of one set of ideas as opposed to, offering like the classroom debate and allowing students to speak their minds and discover new ways of thinking. And with all of the judgments that come about it, I'm wondering if you think there are any implications that have come from this into today's political debate. I know it's much more partisan these days, a bit more hostile, if you will, more spicy. So I'm wondering if there are any implications of judgment in there.
Well, there certainly are. There's certainly, the phenomenon exists that, people who hate Trump, who were opposed to Trump in the election, will hear no good about him or his administration. And the people who voted for him often are, they're angry at, for short, let's call them Hillary supporters. I don't know how much that is influenced by the campus issues. I'm just not sure. The reign of dogmatism on campus and the predominantly leftward tilt of people, at least in the humanities, may be a factor that some conservatives are reacting against. And they hear nothing but from the universities, but things they disagree with. And the same is true for a lot of the media and the newspapers, and also Hollywood and so forth. So they feel alienated, and when you start feeling alienated, you want to fight back. But honestly, I don't know. There's been a lot of talk about how partisan and increasingly partisan political discussion is.
Right.
But if you look back in history, there have been other periods when it was pretty savage too. I mean, right after the founding, the Federalists and the Jeffersonians were at each other's throat. Newspapers were almost always party newspapers, and talk about fake news
Right.
and partisan reporting. Actually, what we're seeing now, I think the press has become increasingly partisan, mostly from a liberal standpoint, but also the conservative outlets are certainly partisan as well. But that seems strange only because for a long time in the 20th century, there was a standard of journalism, a distinction between reporting and editorializing, a standard of objectivity. There's a long history to this, but the point is we're seeing a decline for that, but that decline is taking us back to like the yellow journalism of the 19th century or earlier. Right. So I don't know if things are actually worse now than ever, but they're certainly worse than, a generation ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, when you were a professor or when you were in academia, did you see a lot of free speech violations? Did you feel like you yourself could not articulate your ideas of objectivism openly? Did you feel like you would be scrutinized for that?
Not really, no. I think the situation I was in, and it was only one college, it was Vassar College, I think it was more open. It was, very few people shared my interest in Ayn Rand and belief in objectivism. But, like the people in my department, they knew I was good at philosophy. Right. And so they respected that. And I think they tended to view it like, well, we're all philosophers. So-and-so goes to Baptist church on Sundays. David goes to objectivist meetings. That's a kind of personal thing. Although it was a lot more than that. I actually taught Rand's works in my classes, but along with other works. And, toward the end, there was something that happened. in the early 80s, after Reagan was elected, there was, it was a lot like what happened after Trump was elected. Everyone was shocked that this conservative got into office. And so people got really one-sided, and it was also, as he began the buildup of our nuclear weapons to outrace the Soviets, there was a huge scare about nuclear winter and bombs are going to start flying. We have enough bombs. Why do we need more bombs? Just to make the rubble dance? So, and that was very universal, but no one wanted to hear any opposite. And so there was a discussion about this, I think it was my last year, and someone asked me if I was going. I said, well, what's the program? And I said, is there anyone on the other side? And the answer was, no, there is no other side. So, and now over the intervening 3 decades, I know from friends still at Vassar, it's gotten much worse, much, much worse. And I mean, it makes the New York Times periodically.
Yeah, that's too bad to hear. Again, these institutions are there for higher learning, for intellectual exploration, for academic freedom. So to really just only allow one side to speak out is very unfortunate. We're very grateful at Students for Liberty. We have a fantastic student group at Vassar College. We'll have to get you connected with them.
Good.
They have a conservative libertarian union on campus that is just absolutely phenomenal. So you'll be proud to hear that Liberty is alive and well at Vassar College still. But I want to switch gears a little bit and go back to Objectivism and Libertarianism. We've talked about this a bit last week, and we've gotten a lot of engagement from our students about this since then. So I'm just curious if you could elaborate a bit more on the differences between Objectivism and Libertarianism.
Sure. Libertarianism is a political philosophy, holding the limited government, economic freedom, individual rights, limited government, rule of law, and so on. And Objectivism agrees totally. I mean, that libertarianism is the political philosophy of Objectivism. But Objectivism is a philosophical system that has views in other branches of philosophy: ethics, epistemology, the theory of knowledge, the theory of human nature, even art, aesthetics, philosophical aesthetics. So in that sense, Objectivism is deeper than Libertarianism because it goes further down. On the other hand, not all libertarians are objectivists. They come to libertarian views for any number of reasons. Some are utilitarians, some have a religious basis for believing in liberty. And so in that sense, libertarianism is wider than Objectivism, in the sense of including more people. But the important point here, I think, is that objectivists really believe you cannot defend liberty coherently and effectively without a clear value basis. Why is liberty important? Why does it matter? Why is liberty the primary political value and not equality or virtue or any other thing? And those other things have at different times in history been the dominant value pursued in society. And there are people today who care a lot more about equality than liberty, and even people who care a lot more about virtue than liberty. So I think that you have to defend why and be able to explain why liberty is a value. And I think that has to come down to a belief in the sanctity of the individual and the individual's right, not just politically, but morally, to live his or her own life and make his or her own choices and interact with people voluntarily. The reason, because we have the capacity to make choices. We have that capacity because we live by reason. We have our minds, and the mind has to work in a certain way. If I force you to do something, then I'm, in effect, putting myself between your mind and your actions, and that is not right. So, and that comes down to the issue that many people have trouble with in Ayn Rand. It's egoism. Your self-interest takes precedence over anything else you might do for people. Granted, there's a lot of people in your lives who benefit your life and make it richer, but that at the end of the day, it's your life, and you're the only one who can live it, and it's the only life you have to live. So that's has to be your ultimate value, your own life and happiness. And you can call that selfish, you can call it egoism, whatever you call it with whatever connotations, that has to be front and center ethically.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like the two really go hand in hand. Are there any issue areas or policies that libertarians and objectivists disagree on?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. In domestic policy, I can't think of any, certainly not anything fundamental. Probably the only area where there is a kind of a difference is foreign policy, where libertarians, I think, tend to be, let me put it this way, the common point between objectivists and other libertarians would be, we don't believe in nation building. We don't think America should be the world's policeman, so to speak. We should, our foreign policy should deal with aggression and the threat of aggression. But the difference is how you define threat. What's your standard for threat? And I think objectivists tend to have a lower threshold for what counts as a threat. For example, you could take ISIS as an example.
Right.
I can understand the libertarian case, like my friends at Cato probably make, that we should just stay out of Syria, not get involved. It's not affecting our national interest. On the other hand, it's a terrorist organization, and we are a very large terrorist target because we're so successful. I mean, so wealthy and successful. That I think most objectivists would say, you can make a case anyway. This is not my field, so I'm not going to make the case. But
Sure.
There could be a case for some kind of military intervention on some scale. So I think that's where the difference lies. I won't say, I'm not going to call my libertarian friends isolationists, because that's not fair.
We prefer non-interventionists.
Non-interventionist, yes. Although that is itself a bit of a loaded term.
Right.
Because,
I would agree.
We're not, the other side is not, let's intervene.
Right.
The other side is, let's protect ourselves.
Exactly. And I think that's an important distinction to make, certainly.
Right.
Are there any other issue areas that you think libertarians and objectivists disagree on, even slightly?
Not in terms of policy. Sometimes the arguments for policy are very different. I mean, the most obvious one is a lot of libertarians who come from a predominantly economic background will make utilitarian arguments for against a minimum wage or against rent controls or whatever. And it's not that that's false, but that objectivists would say, no, that's not where you start. The start is, this is an government exercise of coercion against individuals. And because it's immoral, it will also be impractical, and we can appeal to economics to show that. But if you leave out the moral side of it, you're just inviting someone to say, well, okay, there are these other economists who don't agree with that point.
Right.
And what if we just tweak the economy a little bit to remove that consequence? So I think you need both pieces, but if you can't dispense with a moral foundation.
Right. One thing that comes up frequently is Ayn Rand and religion. And I'm
Right.
wondering if you could elaborate a bit on that. So I think there may be some disagreements amongst libertarians and objectivists there. Maybe some agree too, but...
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's disagreements. On religion, it's probably Rand disagree more with conservatives, but
Sure.
No, Rand was an atheist. Objectivism is a secular philosophy. We don't believe that there is any realm or world beyond this one or any life beyond the ones we're living. But on the other hand, and so that puts us at odds with people who believe in a God, a personal God, or some other kind of higher power. And but yet you have to be a little careful here because, well, first of all, on the issue of toleration, I don't think I'm an atheist because I don't think there's any good reason to believe in a God. But if I'm talking with someone who does believe, I don't assume that they are just wildly irrational.
Right.
I know enough philosophy to know that there are some arguments. Some brilliant philosophers have made those arguments. I don't agree with them, but they're not stupid. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of just initial respect that I would have for someone. I would also say that as an organization, the Atlas Society has made a point from the very beginning that we don't expect you to come to us fully formed objectivist. If you are, that's great. We'll have a great time. But our doors are open to anyone who wants to come and learn. Mm-hmm. And so, we have some people who love Atlas Shrugged, love Ayn Rand's ethics, but still hold on to religious beliefs. And then the other thing I would say, and I'm not backpedaling from the conflict of views, but the other thing I would say is that from talking to a lot of people and asking, what does God mean to you, or what does your religion mean to you? Sometimes it just comes down to the sense that there are spiritual things in life. There are higher values, or I have higher ideals than just making money, or keeping food on the table, advancing in my job. That people have this sense of what's it all about, and religion has been the predominant answer to that question, and it's not the answer I accept, but I don't think the question is invalid. Objectivism has a very strong sense of spiritual values that arise from the nature of our minds, not from anything outside of us, but a need for art, for philosophy, for love, for example. So what I try to do personally, and we try as an organization, keep the discussion open.
Yeah, I think that's really great, really focusing on toleration and the truth in it, right?
Right.
But talking about toleration, one thing that comes to mind we talked about a little bit previously is Ayn Rand and feminism. And feminism, I know, in today's world is often seen as intolerant in some regards. I think we talk about women's superiority, if you will, but true feminism, equality. Do you think Ayn Rand would have been a supporter of that? What do you think her thoughts would be on feminism in today's world?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. A friend of mine, Chris Cabara, and I forget who the other editor was, did a whole book on Ayn Rand and feminism. That had the essays in it, took different standpoints. But Ayn Rand herself, the thing to remember here is that in Atlas Shrugged, she created one of not the strongest woman, most heroic woman. I mean, and this was not a fantasy, a Wonder Woman kind of fantasy.
Right.
It was a railroad executive.
Yeah.
And there's a line from, let's see if I can find it here. There's a line from Atlas where Dagny Taggart is the heroine. There's a line where it says, she was 15 when it occurred to her for the first time that women did not run railroads and that people might object. To hell with that, she thought, and never worried about it again. Now, this was written in 1957. So Rand, in that sense, was way ahead of a lot of 50s culture. And actually, as I remember, she gave a positive review to Betty Friedan's book, The Feminist Myth.
Mystique. Isn't the feminist mystique?
Yes, the Feminist Mystique. However, as feminism became more and more kind of collectivist oriented or group oriented, group identity oriented. She had nothing to do with it, wanted nothing to do with it. And particularly, she wrote some essays during a phase when there was actually a lot of hostility toward men, you'd actually hear women saying, if you're a traitor to your sex if you're heterosexual. And Rand wanted nothing to do that. She, criticized it quite harshly. But I think, today there's a strong, still minority, I would guess, but a strong individualist feminism. My friend Christina Summers is an example.
Yeah.
And the Independent Women's Forum, another group based on that. And I think Rand would have saluted that. I mean, she held that men and women are equal in the sense of, as human beings, the same moral principles apply to them, the same achievements are possible to them, the same practices are needed. The only difference is in the romantic arena, which, where she had her own distinct views and preferences that came out in her books.
Yeah, of course.
But that's not philosophy per se, it's more psychology.
Yeah. Do you think if she was born in today's day and age that she would have differing views, or do you think she would be very firm in her beliefs still? Do you think that the times would have changed her ideas at all? No, it's kind of a trick question to answer.
I think, if she were writing today, she probably would not have written that line about Dagny at 15, because 15-year-old girls are actively encouraged to be in business, including heavy industry. She probably wouldn't be using railroads as her example of industry, but anyway.
Yeah, would have been the Hyperloop probably.
Yeah, right. There we go. So I think her focus would be more on the identity politics version of feminism, and on the we haven't talked much about sexual harassment, but that is tied in a way. It's another big thing on campus, and it has a lot of overlap because this concept of sexual harassment has been broadened to the point where, way beyond actual crime or assault, to a point where even in some contexts a joke can be considered harassment.
Right.
And which means a microaggression, in effect.
Yeah.
So that's the overlap. She would be so opposed to that, and she'd be opposed to it as insulting to women. The whole snowflake. That's a negative epithet, but the whole idea that people can't be individuals, are not strong enough, and that I'm thinking on my feet here, but here's something she might latch onto, is that with all the stuff about sexual harassment, because it's almost always men against women, that the overreaction to it is infantilizing women to some extent. And to whatever extent that is happening, she would be livid about that. Absolutely. She was herself one of the strongest characters I've ever known.
Right. What do you think her views would be? On sex, there was the so-called rape scene in the Fountainhead. What do you think? What does that entail? Why would she put that in there, or what would her views on that be?
She put that in there this is a scene in book 2, chapter 2. So we're already quite a ways into the story, and the scene involves the hero, the man, the protagonist, and the female protagonist, who have met, and it's a scene that I think makes sense in the context of what the character, particularly the woman's character, the character that Rand developed for the woman, Dominique is her name. And that it was an incident, it was a case where she desperately wanted Rourke, but wasn't allowing herself to want anything. She was trying to retreat from the world, and she had succeeded in a lot of ways of just not caring, almost like a practicing Buddhist or something. And then she meets Rourke, and it's head over heels. And he sees that and knows that they could not, just go out on a normal date.
Right.
So, however, it is rape. I mean, it's not, it was rape, it's described as rape. If you read the before and the after, you see that neither of them, and certainly not Dominique, is going to go to the police over this. They both understood what was happening.
Right.
But you have to read the book.
Right.
And people, I know people who know the book really well and say, no, I hate that scene. And it's arguable. But I don't think Rand would have changed it.
Yeah, I think you should keep it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think that's about all the time we have for today, though. So thank you, everyone, so much for watching. If you want to learn more about Objectivism, go ahead and head to SFL Academy link in the comments below. If you want to register for LibertyCon, which you should, it's formerly the International Students for Liberty Conference, go ahead and hit that link in the comments as well. You can also go to atlassociety.org to learn more about their work. And you can also find David's book, The Contested Legacy of Ayn Rand, on Amazon. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.